It began with the sharp click of her heels, each step a deliberate note echoing against the marble floor. Crisp, unapologetic. That was Emily, a woman who knew how to command attention the moment she stepped into a room. And that Saturday night, she came in like she owned the place. The red dress she wore clung to her figure, her perfume swirling in the air long before she got close. I was already there, waiting, sitting in the shadows of our dimly lit living room. A glass of whiskey dangled loosely from my fingers, the amber liquid catching the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I didn't speak, not at first. I just watched her. She stopped abruptly when she noticed me, her confident stride faltering for just a second. Something flashed across her face. Was it guilt? No. Emily was far too composed for guilt. Jake! Her voice was smooth, controlled, almost too casual. What are you doing sitting here like that? You scared me. A low chuckle escaped me as I shook my head, swirling the whiskey in my glass. I scare you. My tone was light, but there was an edge to it I couldn't hide. You're late. She glanced at the clock on the wall, a dismissive flick of her wrist following. It's not that late, she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of exasperation. I told you I was out with Sarah. You're acting like I missed some sort of curfew. There was that tone, the one she used whenever she wanted to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one, the overbearing husband who couldn't let her breathe. As she brushed past me, her heels clicking on the hardwood, I noticed a faint smear of lipstick near her jaw. It was subtle, but enough to catch my attention. I didn't remember her wearing that color when she left earlier. Where were you, really? My voice was calm, steady, almost unnervingly so. She hesitated, her hand twitching slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I just told you, she said, her words clipped. I didn't move. Then why did Sarah call me an hour ago, looking for you? Silence. A beat too long. That was the first crack in her armor. The truth was, Sarah hadn't called me at all. I just threw that out there, hoping Emily would stumble over it. And she did. Her brows furrowed just enough to give her away. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice a little too sharp. I stood, slow and deliberate, my eyes never leaving hers. If you were with Sarah all night, I said, keeping my tone measured, why was she texting me at midnight? Wondering where you were? Emily froze, her throat bobbing as she swallowed hard. But she recovered quickly, her irritation bubbling to the surface like a reflex. Unbelievable, she snapped, her voice dripping with annoyance. I was at the bar next door for 20 minutes. She must have left early and freaked out when I wasn't there. Honestly, Jake, what's your problem? It was smooth, too smooth. She was lying, and we both knew it. For a moment, I almost let it slide. I wanted to believe her, to avoid the nagging suspicion gnawing at the back of my mind. But then I caught it, the faintest trace of cologne on her dress. Expensive. Foreign. Not mine. I didn't press her. Not then. I let her storm upstairs, her voice carrying a string of muttered complaints about how insane I was being. But something had shifted. Her lie was the first domino to fall, and I could feel the rest of them teetering. By Sunday afternoon, an invitation arrived. Sarah again. A big, lively party, exactly the kind of chaos Emily thrived in. Too many people, too much noise, and just enough alcohol to blur the lines. You should come, Emily said, her smile as bright as ever. We need this, Jake. It'll be fun. I studied her face, searching for any trace of last night's lies. She looked at me with that same wide, genuine smile, like none of it had happened. Like she wasn't quietly unraveling everything we'd built. Sure, I said, but I wasn't going for fun. The party was in full swing by the time we arrived. The air was thick with laughter and the clinking of glasses, the kind of energy Emily fed off of. It didn't take long for her to disappear into the crowd, as she always did. I stayed behind, nursing a beer and watching the room with quiet intensity. An hour in, I spotted her reflection in a window. She was across the living room, her phone in hand, typing furiously. Every so often, her eyes flicked toward the back door, a subtle glance that most people wouldn't notice. But I wasn't most people. She slipped outside, and I waited. 5 minutes. Long enough for her to feel comfortable, to think she wasn't being watched. Then I followed. The night was cool, the yard dimly lit by strands of fairy lights draped over the trees. I heard her laugh before I saw her, a soft, intimate sound I hadn't heard in what felt like years. There she was standing near the bushes at the far edge of the yard. And she wasn't alone. Emily was close to a man I didn't recognize. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, her body leaning into his as if drawn by some invisible pull. He whispered something in her ear, and she tilted her head back, laughing softly before their lips met in a kiss that was far too familiar. The beer bottle slipped from my hand, landing with a dull thud on the ground. The sound was enough to make her jump, her eyes darting wildly through the darkness. And that's when she saw me. The man glanced up at me, confused, but I didn't stick around to explain. Without a word, I turned and walked back through the house, out the front door, and into the cold night. Emily didn't come home. At 9 the next morning, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she stood, Emily. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red and swollen like she'd been crying for hours. Her lips quivered, and her voice cracked as she pleaded, "Jake, please just let me explain." She stood there shivering on the porch, tears streaming down her face, falling off her chin like they might somehow wash away what she'd done. Her phone was clutched tightly in one hand, her knuckles white, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, blocking the doorway, arms crossed, staring her down like an immovable gatekeeper. "Jake," she whispered again, her voice trembling. "Please." Her sobs started small, delicate, almost rehearsed. I'd seen her cry before, over tough shifts at the hospital, over the little disappointments life throws at you. But this wasn't that. This was something else. Desperation. But I couldn't tell if it was for me or for herself. I let her stand there in the cold for a long moment before stepping aside. She walked in cautiously, her eyes scanning my face for some sign of forgiveness, but I wouldn't give her any. I stayed silent, my body stiff, making sure she didn't touch me as she passed. The living room was just as I'd left it. The whiskey bottle sat half empty on the coffee table, the glass right where I'd left it the night before. Emily's eyes fell on it, and her lips quivered like she'd just walked onto the scene of some terrible accident. "You didn't sleep," she murmured softly, as though she had the right to be concerned about me. "Sit down." My voice was rough, colder than I intended. I wasn't proud of the way it shook, but I didn't care anymore. Emily obeyed, lowering herself onto the edge of the couch. She perched there like she was sitting in a courtroom, waiting for the judge to deliver a sentence. Her hands trembled as she wiped at her face, but the mascara streaks didn't budge, evidence she couldn't erase. I stayed standing, looming over her. "Who was he?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. She blinked up at me, her lips parting like she was searching for the right words. Nothing came. She was caught, and we both knew it. Her mind scrambled, trying to piece together something that might placate me, something that would put her back in control. "Jake," she began, her voice shaky. "It's not what you think." "What do I think?" I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Do you think I'm stupid, Emily? Do you think I didn't see you? I was there. I saw you kiss him." Her face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no excuse came out. "No lies," I said, my tone dropping into something low and dangerous. "You're going to tell me everything. Who he is, how long this has been going on, why you thought you could do this to me, and then come home crying like you're the victim." Her tears returned, but this time they weren't soft. They were ugly, raw, uncontrollable. Her voice cracked as she begged, "Jake, please. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. A mistake isn't sneaking off with some guy and kissing him in the dark, then staying out all night." She broke under that. Her hands flew to her face, and her sobs became louder, her shoulders shaking violently. She looked small, crumpled, and pitiful in the middle of the room. It was a strange thing, watching someone you once trusted, someone you once loved, reduced to this. But pity wasn't what I felt. I wanted answers. "You're going to start talking," I said quietly, my voice icy and deliberate. "Or I'm going to start packing your things." Emily's hands dropped, her tear-streaked face suddenly shifting. Beneath all the guilt and sorrow, something flickered, something I recognized. Anger. You want answers? She spat, her voice cutting through her sobs like a blade. Fine. You want to know what's going on, Jake? You're going on. The accusation hit me like a slap, sharp and unexpected. I blinked, stunned into silence. You sit there every night, she said, her voice trembling with rage, with your damn laptop glued to your hands. You work until 2 in the morning, and you're never here. You don't see me, Jake. You don't care about what I need or how I feel. You've turned into a ghost, and I'm supposed to just accept that? The room spun around me, her words hitting like a hurricane. So this is my fault now? I asked, my voice deadly calm. I don't know, she shouted, her tears mixing with fury. Maybe it's both of us. Maybe we both gave up on each other, and you just didn't notice. You think this happened overnight? You think I wanted this? Her voice cracked as she threw the words at me, each one jagged and raw. I'd seen Emily angry before, but this was something else. This was like watching a storm tear through a fragile house, glass shattering everywhere. You chose this. I fired back, my finger pointing at her like an accusation. You, not me. I didn't kiss someone else. I didn't sneak around. Don't you dare try to twist this into something it's not. I didn't sleep with him, she screamed, her voice rising above the tension like a thunderclap. Her words hung heavy in the air, vibrating between us, neither of us daring to move. I stared at her, my chest heaving, my mind reeling as I tried to process what she'd just said. And I'm supposed to believe that? My voice cracked as the words left me. Emily slumped back against the couch, her fight draining out of her like a deflating balloon. You can believe whatever you want, Jake, she whispered, barely audible. But I didn't. I swear to you. I stared at her, searching her face for something, truth, remorse, anything. But all I found was exhaustion. I didn't know if she was lying. Worse, I didn't know if I even cared anymore. Who is he? I asked again, my voice low, almost hollow. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on her trembling hands like the answer might magically appear there. Finally, she whispered, his name is Nate. The name hit me like a slap. Nate, I repeated, letting the bitterness of it roll off my tongue. And how long has this been going on? Emily didn't answer right away. Her silence stretched until it became suffocating. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she said, 3 months. 3 months. 90 days of my life. Our life. Reduced to a lie. The weight of her words crushed me, making my knees weak. I sank into the armchair across from her, putting as much distance between us as the room allowed. She started crying again, quieter now, like she was waiting for me to speak, to say anything. But my mind was blank, overrun with a chaos I couldn't untangle. Finally, I looked at her, my voice as cold as steel. You need to leave. Her head snapped up. What? You heard me, I said flatly. You're going to pack a bag and leave. Go stay with Sarah. Or Nate. I don't care. Jake, please. I stood up abruptly, cutting her off. I need you out of this house, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I need time to think, and right now, I can't even look at you. Her face crumbled, tears spilling faster, but I didn't let it sway me. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her surrounded by the wreckage she'd caused. When I reached the bedroom, I shut the door behind me. The click of it felt empty, hollow. Her muffled voice filtered through the walls, pleading, reasoning, as though words could rewind the clock. I stood there, staring at the unmade bed where we used to sleep, side by side. Now, the rumpled sheets felt foreign, like they belonged to strangers. I should have felt something, anger, heartbreak, disgust, but instead, there was just a sinking void in my chest. Then I heard it, a dull thud from the other room, followed by Emily's frustrated sob. I knew what she was doing, pacing, probably throwing clothes into a bag, but I didn't go out there. I stayed rooted in place, my eyes landing on the framed wedding photo sitting on the dresser. It was from 6 years ago, taken at sunset. Emily had leaned her head on my shoulder, her smile, so bright it could have lit up the sky. I looked so sure of her in that picture, so certain of everything. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the frame and turned it face down, unable to look at it any longer. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the front door creak open. "Jake!" Her voice trembled, coming from somewhere down the hall. I'm going. I'll stay with Sarah." The silence that followed was deafening. She was waiting for me to respond, maybe hoping I'd call her back, tell her we could fix this. But I didn't. I heard her sigh, a shaky, defeated sound, before the door clicked shut. The house seemed to swallow the noise, greedily devouring the quiet it had been starving for. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV as it droned on in the background. But my mind kept looping back to that moment in the yard. Emily's hand on his chest. Nate. I didn't know anything about him, just a name and the way she'd said it, like a confession. At some point, I started digging. Emily had taken her phone, but our shared laptop was still here. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but pride wasn't something I could afford anymore. I opened her email, her messages, anything I could find. And there it was. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll find a way to slip out early. Nate." The message was 3 weeks old, buried under layers of mundane threads. Shopping receipts, work schedules, emails from her sister. Like a rat hiding in the basement. It had been there all along. I scrolled further, my stomach tightening with every click. Hotels. Bars. Emily had even told me she was picking up extra shifts on nights she'd been with him. I slammed the laptop shut, so hard I thought I might break it. My hands shook as I leaned back, the walls of the living room closing in around me. I wanted to scream, to smash something, anything, but all I did was sit there, teeth clenched so tight my jaw ached. 3 months. 3 months of my life stolen by a stranger. I couldn't even put a face to the name, and somehow that made it worse. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Emily. I didn't answer. It buzzed again, and again. Then a text. "Jake, please. I need to talk to you. I can explain everything." She'd already tried to explain, and all I'd heard were excuses. I shut the phone off and tossed it across the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling as the silence pressed in. The knock came an hour later. 3 sharp, insistent raps that cut through the quiet like a blade. My pulse spiked, my mind immediately jumping to her. I swung the door open, ready to tell Emily to go to hell. But it wasn't her. It was Sarah. "Jake," she said, her tone brisk and unfriendly, her expression set like she'd already picked a side. Her dark hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she stood with her arms crossed like she was about to lecture me. "We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, narrowing my eyes. "Why are you here?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, her eyes flicked past me, scanning the house like she was checking to see if Emily was there. Finally, she let out a sigh, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Emily's at my place," she said. "She's a mess, Jake. She won't stop crying. She didn't want me to come here, but someone had to." I barked out a laugh, bitter, sharp, and humorless. "Someone had to? What exactly do you think you're here to do?" Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I know you're angry." "Angry?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Sarah, I caught my wife cheating on me. Angry doesn't even come close to covering it." She shook her head, undeterred. "You don't know the whole story." That's what she keeps saying. And you know what? I snapped. "I don't care anymore." "Jake, listen to me," Sarah pressed, her tone firm. "It's not what you think. I know about Nate." The sound of his name turned my stomach. "Then why don't you enlighten me, Sarah?" I said through clenched teeth. "What is it I don't know?" She hesitated, just for a second before dropping her arms and looking me dead in the eye. "Nate's not some random guy. He's someone Emily knew before you two got married." The words hit me like a sucker punch. My chest tightened, and my heart pounded so hard I could barely hear over the roar in my ears. "What?" "I don't know everything," Sarah admitted, her voice softer now. "But he's from her past. I didn't even know they were talking again until recently." She swore to me it wasn't serious, that it was just stupid mistakes. "But Jake," she trailed off, her face softening. "She's not okay, and neither are you. You both need to figure this out." Her words didn't register at first. My mind was stuck on that name, on the weight of what she'd just revealed. Nate, Emily's past. A piece of her life she'd kept buried, waiting like a landmine for me to step on. Sarah kept talking, but I couldn't hear her anymore. The only thought pounding through my head was, what else don't I know? For the first time, I realized the worst part wasn't the kiss, wasn't even the lies. It was this. I'd married a woman I didn't really know at all. Sarah left not long after, leaving me alone with the silence of the house and the chaos in my head. Nate's not some random guy. He's someone Emily knew before you two got married. The words circled me like vultures, picking apart every memory I'd ever had of her. I'd always thought Emily's past was just that past. She wasn't exactly a closed book, but there were chapters she never let me read, and I'd never pressed. I didn't think I needed to. Maybe that was my mistake. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, staring at Emily's name in my messages. A million questions churned in my mind, and I hated that the only person who could answer them was the same one who'd shattered my trust. Tell me about Nate. Don't lie. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. A minute passed, then another. My phone vibrated. Emily. Jake, please let me call you. Me? Answer the question. Silence. Then, finally a reply. Emily. We dated, before you and me. It was a long time ago. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the screen. Define dated. This time, her reply took longer. When it came, the words cut through me like glass. Emily. We were serious for a while, but he cheated on me. It ended badly, and I haven't seen him since until a few months ago. Cheated on her. The irony almost made me laugh, but it caught in my throat like a jagged edge. Nate, the guy who'd broken her once, and now, years later, she brought him back into our lives like a poison she couldn't resist. I slammed the phone onto the coffee table, the screen lighting up one more time with another message. Emily, I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear to you, Jake, didn't mean for it to happen. Like falling into his arms was some kind of accident, some force of nature she couldn't control. I stood abruptly, pacing the living room like a caged animal. My mind spiraled into memories I didn't want to revisit. The first time Emily told me she loved me, the night I proposed, the morning we signed the papers for this house. Those moments had felt so solid, so real. Now, they felt hollow, like cheap props on a crumbling stage. What other pieces of her life had she hidden? How much of her foundation was built on cracks? I didn't sleep that night. At some point, I found myself in the kitchen, gripping my fourth glass of water. The house felt unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. Then my phone buzzed again, a call. Emily. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the fourth, I picked up. What? My voice was cold, barely more than a word. For a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven, like she was trying to hold herself together. Jake, her voice cracked, raw and desperate. I know you hate me right now, but you have to understand, I didn't go looking for him. He showed up. I didn't say a word, and she took my silence as permission to keep talking, filling the void with words I didn't want to hear. I ran into him at that coffee shop near the hospital. I hadn't seen him in years. I didn't even recognize him at first. But he recognized me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. And what? I asked, my voice cold. You just picked up where you left off? You let the guy who cheated on you walk right back into your life. Her breath hitched. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't plan for this, Jake. There it is again. I muttered, cutting her off. I didn't plan for this. Like your lips just accidentally fell onto his at that party. I messed up, she choked out, her voice breaking. I know I did, but it's not as simple as you think. Seeing him, being around him, it made me question everything. I don't know what's wrong with me. My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles white. What do you mean, everything? Us. She didn't answer right away, and the silence that followed was worse than any excuse she could have given. I don't know, she whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. Something inside me shattered, like a pane of glass giving way under its own weight. You don't know? I repeated, my voice quiet but razor sharp. You don't know if you love me anymore? After 7 years, Emily? Jake, hi. I hung up. The next morning I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff and my chest hollow. My phone buzzed constantly, missed calls, texts, all from Emily. I ignored every single one. By noon, I was at my brother Ryan's place. He lived a few miles out of town in a rundown rental that looked like it was held together with duct tape and hope. It wasn't much, but it was his, and more importantly, it was quiet. Ryan opened the door and took one look at me before shaking his head. "Damn, man, you look like hell." "Feel worse," I muttered, stepping inside. He led me to the kitchen and handed me a beer without asking any questions. That was why I came to him. Ryan didn't push. He let me sit in silence, knowing I'd talk when I was ready. 20 minutes passed before I finally spoke. "She cheated on me," I said flatly, staring at the label on the beer bottle. 3 months, with some guy from her past. Ryan let out a low whistle. "Jesus." She said she didn't sleep with him. I continued, my voice heavy with doubt. "But I don't know if I believe her. I caught them at a party." Ryan leaned back in his chair, frowning. "You think she's lying about it?" "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "And I don't even know if it matters anymore." He stayed quiet for a moment before speaking again, his tone cautious. "So what now?" I exhaled slowly, the question weighing on me. "I don't know." I told her to leave. "She's at Sarah's, but she keeps calling, saying she wants to fix things." "And do you want to?" I looked up at him, my throat tightening. "How do you fix something like this?" Ryan didn't have an answer. Neither did I. What I did know was that whatever Emily and I used to have, the trust, the love, the certainty was gone. And even if we tried to piece it back together, the cracks would always be there. The worst part? I didn't know if I was angrier at her for breaking us or at myself for still caring. No one warns you about betrayal. They don't tell you how it infects your mind like a virus, spreading until it takes over everything. You can't sleep because every time you close your eyes, you see them. Her with someone else. You can't eat because your stomach twists with the realization that the life you thought you were living wasn't real. And worst of all, you can't escape the questions, the what-ifs, the whys. I spent the next few days crashing on Ryan's old couch, staring at the ceiling while time blurred around me. He didn't pry, but I could feel his eyes on me, waiting, wondering how much longer I'd stay like this. I wanted to get up, to move, to fix myself, but it felt like I was buried under cement. On the third day, Emily called again. For reasons I couldn't explain, I answered. Maybe I was looking for closure. Maybe I wanted her to finally crack, to admit everything so I could decide what to do next. "Jake!" Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she didn't know which version of me she'd get on the other end of the line. I said nothing. She took my silence as permission to continue. "I know you don't want to hear this right now," she began, her voice trembling. "But I can't just sit here and not try. I can't let us end like this." The word has stung more than I wanted it to. "Us," I said, my voice low and bitter. "There hasn't been an us for months, Emily. You killed at the moment you let him back into your life." She choked on a breath. "I made a mistake, Jake. One mistake." "Stop calling it that." I snapped, my grip tightening on the phone. "Stop acting like you tripped and fell into his arms. You chose him, Emily. You chose to see him, to talk to him, I couldn't even finish the sentence. "And now you want to act like this is something we can patch up with a conversation?" My voice was sharp, every word laced with bitterness. Her silence cut through me like a blade. I could hear her breathing on the other end, unsteady and shallow, like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. "I don't know what else to say. I was confused. A bitter laugh escaped me, harsh and hollow. "Confused about what, Emily? About whether or not you wanted to blow up our marriage? Did you wake up one day and forget you were married to me? Or did you just not care?" The line went quiet again. For a moment, I thought she'd hung up, but then she spoke, her voice brittle and low. "I didn't go looking for him, Jake," she said. "But when I saw him again, it brought everything back. The way I felt before he hurt me, before everything fell apart. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself, that I could—" She trailed off, the words hanging in the air like a noose. "That you could what?" I demanded, each word cutting like a knife. "Prove that you still had his attention? That he still wanted you? Is that what this was?" "No," she shouted suddenly, the crack in her voice startling both of us. "It wasn't about him. It was about me, Jake. It was about everything I feel like I've lost. I love you, but I've been drowning, and I don't know how to explain it." Her words hit like a gut punch, knocking the wind out of me. So your solution was to cheat on me? I shot back, my voice rising. I didn't plan for this, she said again, quieter this time, like she hated the words as much as I did. You keep saying that, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Silence fell between us, thick with everything unsaid. I could hear her crying on the other end, soft, broken sobs, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. You don't get to cry, Emily, I said finally, my tone cold and sharp. You don't get to sit there and play the victim when you're the one who did this. I know, she said softly, her voice cracking. I need you to know it wasn't about you. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I don't know how I let it get this far. I ran a hand down my face, the exhaustion of it all finally catching up with me. It is about me, Emily. You don't get to decide that it's not. You took something from me that I can't get back, and I don't think you even understand what that means. I do understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. And I hate myself for it. Good, I said bluntly. The line went quiet again, her silence heavy and final. After a long pause, she whispered, What happens now, Jake? I didn't answer right away. I didn't know. Everything felt like ash, burned beyond recognition. I need time, I said finally. And I need you to leave me alone. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. I heard her exhale shakily before she said, Okay. I hung up without another word. That night, Ryan found me outside on his porch, staring into the dark. The cold bit in my skin, but I barely felt it. I didn't feel anything anymore. Not the chill, not the ache in my chest, nothing. Ryan sat down next to me, handing me a beer without saying anything. We sat in silence for a while before he finally spoke. You don't have to decide everything right now, you know, he said, his voice calm. But whatever you do, you have to do it for you. Not her. Not anyone else. I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the empty street ahead. I keep asking myself what I did wrong. I admitted, my voice barely audible. What I missed. Why I wasn't enough. Ryan turned to look at me, frowning. Don't do that, man. Don't put this on yourself. She made her choices. They're on her, not you. I know, I said, though the words felt hollow. We sat there a while longer, the night wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. I thought about Emily, her tears, her excuses, the years we'd spent together that now felt tainted. I didn't know what the future looked like. I didn't know if I could forgive her, or if I even wanted to. But one thing was clear, whatever us was, it was gone. All that remained were ashes and echoes of what used to be. The morning after Emily's call, I woke up on Ryan's couch again, my neck twisted at an awkward angle, the blanket half on the floor. I stared at the ceiling, trying to pull myself together, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. It felt like she was still there, haunting the room like a ghost. Her voice, her face, the way she looked at me the last time I saw her. By noon, I knew I couldn't sit here anymore. The walls of Ryan's place, as quiet as they were, felt too close, too suffocating. I needed to do something, anything to break the spiral. I decided to go back to the house. I hadn't been there since I told Emily to leave, and though I dreaded seeing the place where everything had fallen apart, I couldn't avoid it forever. The drive felt longer than it should have. With every mile, the weight on my chest grew heavier, like something was pressing down on me. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I stayed in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the front door. It was just a house, wood, brick, and glass. But it felt like so much more, like the tomb of everything we once were. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air in the house was stale, heavy with the weight of absence. I stepped into the living room, my shoes echoing softly against the hardwood floor. The place was frozen in time. Emily's shoes were still kicked off near the door, exactly where she'd left them. A mug sat abandoned on the kitchen counter, as if she might walk back in and pick it up any second. But she wouldn't. Not yet. I moved through the house like a ghost, drifting from one room to the next, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I ended up in the bedroom, my hand hesitating on the doorknob before I finally pushed it open. The bed was made now. For some reason, that was the first thing I noticed. Before she left, Emily must have taken the time to fix it, like smoothing the sheets could somehow erase what had happened. I sank onto the edge of the mattress, burying my face in my hands. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like it might crush me. I don't know how long I sat there before my eyes drifted to her nightstand. There, half hidden behind a stack of books, was a small, red notebook. My chest tightened. I'd seen that notebook before. Emily always said it was where she jotted down work notes, little reminders, grocery lists. Nothing important, she used to say. But now I wasn't sure I believed anything she told me anymore. Against my better judgment, I reached for it. The pages were soft and worn at the edges, evidence of her thumbing through it over and over. My hands trembled as I opened it, hoping, praying, to find something innocent, something that would prove my instincts wrong. But I didn't. On the third page, I saw his name. Nate. The entry wasn't long, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I saw him again today. Nate. I thought I'd forgotten what he looked like, but the second I saw him, it all came back. He smiled at me like no time had passed, and I felt, I don't know, alive? That's not fair to Jake. I know it's not, but I don't know how to stop feeling this way. I snapped the notebook shut so fast it felt like it might break in my hands. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at the cover, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. Alive. The word echoed in my mind, louder and louder, until I thought I might scream. She felt alive with him? What did that make me? What did that make us? A slow death? A cage she wanted to escape? I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as I shoved the notebook back into the nightstand. My breaths came fast and uneven as I stumbled out of the bedroom and collapsed onto the couch in the living room. I tried to calm myself down, but I couldn't. The betrayal wasn't just in the kiss or the lies or even the secrets. It was in the truth of what Emily had been feeling, hiding from me for God knows how long. Hours later, as the sun began to set, my phone buzzed. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew who it was. Emily. I stared at it for a long time before I answered. This time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't shouting. I just felt empty. What? Her breath hitched on the other end. Jake. Her voice was soft, hesitant. I know I've said it 100 times, but I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I need to try. I need you to know. Stop. I cut her off, my voice flat. You don't need to tell me anything right now. But Jake, I said stop. Her silence hung heavy between us. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven, as if she were trying to hold herself together. I need time, I said finally, and I need you to leave me alone. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. After a long pause, she exhaled shakily. Okay, she whispered. I hung up without another word. By the time I got home that night, the house felt different. Empty, but not in a haunting way. More like someone had cracked open a window after years of keeping it shut. I dropped my keys on the table and stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle around me. My eyes drifted to the corner where Emily's boxes had been. Now that they were gone, the room felt bigger somehow, like there was space to breathe again. But clearing out space has its own weight. It makes room for everything you've been avoiding. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor as the questions came rushing back. Where did we go wrong? Was it my long hours at work? Her quiet frustrations she never voiced? The nights we spent together, but apart, pretending everything was fine? I'd spent so much time blaming her that I hadn't stopped to look in the mirror. That didn't mean she wasn't at fault. It didn't mean what she did was forgivable. But for the first time, I wondered if the cracks in our foundation had been there all along, waiting for the weight of everything to bring it down. Marriage doesn't collapse under the weight of one person alone. It cracks slowly, quietly, until one small push shatters everything. She said she felt like she was drowning, and I hadn't seen it. I hadn't noticed. That realization brought something new into my anger. Regret. That night, I rummaged through the kitchen drawer where we kept all the usual junk, bills, pens, takeout menus, until I found what I was looking for. A small envelope, unopened, with Emily's handwriting on the front. It was a birthday card. She'd given it to me 2 months ago, but we'd had an argument that morning over something stupid. I'd forgotten to fix the sink. She'd rolled her eyes. I'd shoved the card into the drawer without opening it, letting it sit there like a quiet protest. Now, I held it in my hands, my chest tight. Slowly, I opened the flap and pulled out the card. The front was simple, a photo of a mountain range with the words, "To many more adventures." Inside, her handwriting filled the blank space. Jake, I know I'm not always easy to love. I'm stubborn, and I'm impatient, and I push too hard when I shouldn't. But I need you to know that through everything, every fight, every rough day, you're still the person I want by my side. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. I'm so proud of the life we've built, even when I don't always say it out loud. I love you. I love us. Happy birthday, Jake. Emily. I set the card down on the table and stared at it for a long time, my vision blurring. That was the hardest part, the knowing. Knowing that what we had was real once. The love, the connection, it wasn't a lie. It just wasn't enough to stop her from falling apart. And maybe that's what life is sometimes. You love someone. You give them everything you have, and it's still not enough to save them. But that didn't mean I couldn't save myself. The next morning, I woke up early and cleaned the house from top to bottom. I threw out everything I didn't need, the empty bottles, the clutter, the reminders of a life that no longer fit. It wasn't a solution, but it felt like a start. For the first time in weeks, I grabbed my jacket, locked the front door, and stepped outside into the cold morning air. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. The life I'd known was over, but maybe, just maybe, that meant I could build something new. One step at a time. The first step took me to the hardware store. It felt impulsive, random even, but I knew I couldn't spend another day wandering through hollow rooms. If the house was going to be mine again, it needed to change. Inside, I wandered the aisles, letting the smell of fresh wood and paint calm my mind. I grabbed supplies I hadn't touched in years: sandpaper, brushes, rollers. A few cans of deep blue paint, a color that felt nothing like the dull beige Emily had chosen when we first moved in. My cart filled with purpose. Like every item had the potential to scrub away the ghost of our marriage still lingering in the corners of the house. Back home, I pushed all the furniture to the center of the living room, threw an old sheet over it, and started on the walls. With every stroke of paint, the space looked less like ours and more like mine. The walls where Emily had hung pictures, picked curtains, and rearranged furniture were disappearing, one layer at a time. And it felt good. By the time the first wall was done, my arms ached, my clothes were splattered with blue, and sweat dripped down my neck. But I didn't stop. I turned on some loud, gritty music and kept going, letting the sound drown out my thoughts. Somewhere between coats of paint, Ryan texted me. "Ryan, you alive, man? Haven't heard from you today." "Me, yeah. Painting the house." "Ryan, seriously? Who are you, Bob the Builder?" I smirked faintly and sent back. "Me, something like that. Needed to make this place mine again." There was a long pause before his response came. "Ryan, proud of you, man. Keep going." I don't know why, but those words hit me harder than I expected. Keep going. It wasn't advice. It wasn't pity. It was just Ryan, standing quietly in my corner, cheering me on when I wasn't sure how to cheer for myself. It took me 3 days to finish the living room. 3 days of sanding, painting, and dragging every ounce of frustration and pain across those walls. By the end, I was sore, bruised, and perpetually covered in flecks of blue paint. But the room was mine now. The dull beige was gone, replaced with a rich, dark blue that reminded me of late nights and quiet spaces. On the final night, I collapsed onto the couch, staring at my work with a mix of pride and exhaustion. The room was still empty, no photos, no decorations, but that felt right. A blank slate. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. On the 4th day, Ryan showed up unannounced, 2 six-packs in hand. "Figured you could use this," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. I laughed softly for the first time in what felt like forever. "Always showing up when I need you, huh? That's what brothers are for," he said with a shrug. "Now, show me this masterpiece of yours." I led him into the living room, where the paint was still drying. The air smelled sharp and clean, the room unrecognizable from what it had been before. Ryan whistled low, nodding in approval. "Not bad, Bob the Builder. Not bad at all." For the first time, I felt something close to hope. "You're relentless," I said as I opened the door, stepping aside to let Ryan in. He grinned, kicking off his shoes. "You think I'm gonna let you hide out in here forever? Nah, man. Let's see this masterpiece." I led him into the living room, suddenly feeling self-conscious about the space I'd spent days buried in. Ryan whistled low, his eyes scanning the walls. "Damn," he said, nodding appreciatively. "Looks like a whole new house." "That was the point," I muttered, shoving my hands into my pockets. Ryan dropped onto the couch and cracked open a beer. "You know, some guys would have just gone on a 3-week bender or bought a motorcycle. But nope, you turn into a freaking DIY wizard." I rolled my eyes and sat down across from him. It was cheaper than therapy. Ryan took a long sip of his beer, his expression softening as he looked at me. "How you feeling, though?" "For real." I paused, my gaze drifting to the wall I'd spent hours painting. "Better, I think. Still angry. Still, I don't know. Sad." "That's normal," Ryan said gently. "You don't just forget 7 years overnight. Doesn't mean you're not moving forward." I nodded slowly. He wasn't wrong. The anger I'd carried like armor had started to cool, replaced by something quieter, a dull ache, like the tenderness of a fading bruise. "I don't miss her," I said finally. "Not really. I miss the idea of her, the version of us that worked, the one I thought would last forever." Ryan didn't say anything, letting me sit with the thought for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder what I could have done differently," I admitted, my voice low. "Like maybe if I'd paid more attention, or said something sooner, it wouldn't have fallen apart." Ryan shook his head firmly. "You can't think like that. Look, maybe there were cracks before Nate, but she made the choice to cheat, Jake. Not you. Don't carry her guilt on top of your own." I swallowed hard, nodding again. "Yeah. And anyway," Ryan added, grinning suddenly, "you've already got 1 foot out of the grave. Most guys would still be lying face down in bed, re-watching their wedding video, and crying into a pizza box." I snorted, shaking my head. "Glad to know the bar is so low." Ryan laughed, raising his beer. "To new beginnings, man. Whatever the hell they look like." I clinked my bottle against his, and for the first time in weeks I smiled. A real smile. Not forced, not bitter. That night, after Ryan left, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I landed on Emily's name. My thumb hovered over it for a second, hesitating. I wasn't going to call her. Not because I hated her, I didn't anymore. And not because I missed her. I just didn't need her to fill the silence. Instead, I opened the text thread and typed out a message I had no intention of sending. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily. I'm going to be okay." I stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted the draft and set the phone down. I didn't need her to know that I'd be okay. I just needed me to know it. I stood, stretching, and glanced around the room. It wasn't finished yet. There were still other walls to paint, furniture to replace, new memories to create. But it was a start. Walking out onto the back porch, I sat on the steps and breathed in the cool night air. The stars above were scattered across the dark sky like quiet reminders that life goes on, no matter how broken it feels. And maybe, just maybe, so would I.